boys inside, they were driving me crazy. And I think they both got out. Hopefully. The world will cooperate with me. Anyways, thank you so much for your kind words and support on this series. Most of you know that last month I had a few things going on and made it almost impossible to be very active. But that time is over and I am catching up. And that's why this is the first series, but we'll have another one in the month of July. So, thank you for understanding, and again, for your kind words. Let's talk about today's cold case that was finally solved. Carol was 16 years old when she had a major crush on a boy from her neighborhood. His name was James Quinn. They were juniors at Largo High School, and it was said or gossiped that they were dating. If that was true, they were keeping it a secret. They never mentioned a relationship with each other to their friends nor their families. So, on the evening of December 13th, 1976, the phone was ringing at Carol's house in Largo, Florida. Carol ran to answer, and she said something like, "It's for me." Then she spent several minutes whispering down the line. She then hung up the phone, and you could tell that she was very happy and excited. A few minutes later, she told her mom that she was going to walk to the store. By the time her mom was asking what she needed from the store, she was out the door. She yelled as she walked away, "It won't be long." Now, the walk to the store and back should have taken around 20 minutes or less. So after an hour, her mother figured that, maybe she met some of her friends along the way and were just chatting. But then 2 hours passed and no signs of Carol. So Norma, Carol's mom, began to worry. Eventually, she asked Carol's brother to go look for her, and he came back saying that he couldn't find her. By the next morning, they were worried, sick, and they called the police, but they were just not going to wait for the police to find Carol. They started to go around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, going to Carol's friends' homes, and trying to look for her. But Carol's brother was the one that found her eventually. accident. Because on top of her body there was a concrete block. They took the body in for an autopsy, and it revealed that she had been strangled and struck on the head with some heavy object. To make things worse, those things didn't kill her. And she was still alive when she was tossed into the pond. So the cause of death was drowning. Who could have done that? I mean, this is a young girl with dreams of going to college, who was excited about life. But then Carol's half-brother, Jerry Irwin, was briefly considered a suspect. He was well known because he was a juvenile delinquent, if you want to call it that. And when they asked him about where he was that night, he just didn't have an alibi. But soon enough, they kind of changed the focus. And now they started investigating 17-year-old James Gwen, who was this boy that everyone believed that was having some kind of, or that it was in some kind of a relationship with Carol, and that they were keeping it a secret. I mean, he was a good suspect to the police. He had a secret romance with the victim. There was some entries in Carol's diary talking about how much she liked him. And that last call she received came from James' home. But when he was asked, he said that it was only to discuss some stuff about school, homework in particular. He also said that he never saw Carol that night, that he was at home. I mean, this was not an airtight alibi. I promise that fly is driving me nuts. I'm gonna leave the screen open and hopefully she'll go away. But he was sticking to it, and he was also one of the people that was at the funeral with. Clearly, he was very sad and was there for her family. He seemed very sad, and he didn't look like a suspect, or at least what police look and believe it's the behavior of somebody who might have had something to do with the crime. Over the next 18 months, the police worked hard and investigated every lead, but nothing. No one had seen Carol that night. She never made it to the store, and the theory is that somebody must have found her along the route, dragged her to some isolated spot, and attacked her there. The location of that crime scene was unknown, and also the motive. She was not robbed or raped. Eventually, police did find some hairs in the victim's body, but at the time, DNA was not available. And soon enough, the case went cold. While the investigation continued, I can only imagine what Carol's family was going through. They not only lost the girl, but there was no justice. And James, the secret boyfriend, was moving on with his life. After he graduated high school, he joined the U.S. Navy. He had a long, successful career in the military, and he served as a submariner. I'm assuming somebody who's in a submarine. By the year 1994, he had 16 years of service behind him, and he was stationed at the U.S. Naval Submarine Base in Connecticut. In the year 1994, the Largo Police Department decided to take another look at Carol's case. They had the hair, so they ended up submitting to the FBI lab this hairs, and they were able to match it and come up with a DNA profile. Well, it didn't actually match a person, but they were all able to come up with this profile. The suspect that they had in mind did not have so much as a traffic violation against his name. And it was James Quinn, who at the time was living an exemplary life. But in order to prove that this was the guy, what they needed was a biological sample. That way they could compare it to the profile. So they applied for a search warrant to draw blood from Gwen, who was in active duty Navy at the time. Detectives also informed the Naval Criminal, I think it's called the NCIS, of their ongoing investigation. On July 15th, 1998, a couple of NCIS investigators brought James in for some questioning. And they told him that the Largo police had physical evidence linking him to a murder that happened in the year 1976. And they said, well, you better come clean now if you did this, because you'll have more options on the table. But if they match your sample to their profile that they have, basically they're gonna grab you by the nuts. Paraphrasing. It was a bluff, of course. The police had not yet made a DNA match, but soon enough he cracked and admitted that he killed Carol Hutto, but he said that it was an accident. this was close to both of their homes. They talked for a while, then started kissing, and eventually had sex. After they started, quote unquote, kidding around with Carol running through the house, and he was chasing her, but she fell during the chase and hit her head. She was unconscious, so he panicked, and he thought that Carol was dead, and that he would be responsible for her death. So he decided to hide her body. He carried the body to a nearby pond and threw her inside, watching her sink below the surface, and then he walked home. If you remember, the evidence that they have and the results of the autopsy, you already know that this does not match the evidence. The injuries were not consistent with a fall. She had been strangled and struck on the head. Yet he was sticking to his version of events. But by the night before a trial, he came up with a new story. In that story, he said that they did not have sex, which, okay, now it matches a little bit more. He said that he wanted to, but she said no. And so he tried to do it, and things got physical. Carol started screaming, then scratching and hitting him. In response, he grabbed her by the throat and started squeezing. Then he released it, but Carol collapsed to the floor. Again, he said after that he'd panic and decided to hide the body. He asked why, he was asked why he struck her on the head. He said it was to make it look like someone else had done it. Nonetheless, the outcome was the same. She was brought to this pond, thrown in, way down with a concrete block while she was still alive. He swore that he had no idea that she was still alive. Although, if he was trying to do all this to hide the fact that he tried to rape her, I don't think he would have called 911 to get her help. Of the two stories that he told, this one seemed by far the more likely. And it goes according to the evidence. But his lawyers still did not believe that even after this, he should get first-degree charge. They believe that after confessing, he probably would get a third-degree murder, or even possibly manslaughter. But the jury did not agree. They had 22 minutes of deliberation, and he was found guilty of murder in the first degree. And he was sentenced to life in prison and must serve at least 25 years before he's eligible for parole, which means he'd be well into his 60s before he had a chance at freedom. But at least he has a chance, one that Carol never had. I don't think this is a very common narrative this narrative happens. I think, this kind of situation happens very often where one of in the relationship wants something more and the other one doesn't, and they meet and, they end up fighting over this. In some cases, ends up in a rape that the person never reports, or in some other cases, it's just a physical fight that the person is too embarrassed to report it. In any case, this is not how things, should go, and it's a shame that this had to happen to Carol, and it's even worse thinking about the fact that she was alive and she just drowned. There was this little thread I found about people that quote unquote make mistakes and then become the best kind of people ever. Like in this case, he was in the Navy, he was serving his country, he was doing everything right, he never had a ticket. He was the kind of guy that you would have never thought was involved in something so vile and so evil. Yet he was. So what's the argument there? Well, a lot of people believe that you can always redeem yourself if you're not caught. And some other people are completely against that idea, because if you commit a crime, you should pay for it and then, rehabilitate yourself. I think we must agree that after learning about this cold case is finally solved, this is a rare scenario, because most of them, they either are in jail when the DNA becomes available and they already have a match because the guy is already in jail, or was a criminal and was dead, like the guy with the motorcycle accident, or they're criminals, so they end up in jail or dead. So according to some of these people, they kind of pay the price with their own lives, either going to jail for something unrelated or dying because of their bad choices. Honestly, I don't know where I stand. I think that I'd rather, if I put myself in the family's shoes, I'd rather catch this guy than think, oh, well, I hope he's in jail, or I hope that he had an accident and died. You know what I mean? Yeah, they're not gonna bring that person back, but at the same time, you get a little bit of relief knowing that we know who did it and that they're gonna have to pay for it. I think the knowing changes everything. So anyway,